Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had always known she was different. Growing up in a small Texas town where most girls dreamed of becoming teachers or nurses, she spent her afternoons practicing martial arts and studying military strategy. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her that strength wasn't about size or gender. It was about determination and skill. After 8 grueling years in the Navy SEALs, Sarah had proven herself countless times. She had completed missions in Afghanistan, rescued hostages in Somalia, and earned the respect of every operative she served alongside. Her teammates called her Ghost because of her ability to move silently through enemy territory, appearing and disappearing like a shadow in the night. Now at 32, Sarah worked for a specialized government task force that handled the most sensitive operations, the kind of missions that never made it to the news, where success meant saving lives and failure could destabilize entire regions. She thrived in this world of shadows and secrets, where her skills made the difference between life and death. On a humid Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C., Sarah sat in a sterile briefing room, listening to her commanding officer outline their next assignment. The target was Viktor Petrov, a Russian arms dealer who had been selling advanced weapons to terrorist organizations across the Middle East. Intelligence suggested he was planning something big, a major arms deal that could put devastating weapons in the wrong hands. Sarah studied Petrov's file carefully. The man was cunning, ruthless, and extremely well connected. He operated through a network of legitimate businesses, making him nearly untouchable through conventional law enforcement. His organization had tentacles reaching into governments, military contractors, and criminal syndicates worldwide. What made this mission particularly challenging was Petrov's paranoia. He trusted no one completely and changed his location frequently. The man employed former Special Forces operatives as bodyguards and used sophisticated counter-surveillance techniques. Previous attempts to capture him had failed, resulting in the deaths of several agents from other intelligence agencies. Sarah's assignment was to infiltrate Petrov's inner circle by posing as a wealthy art collector, interested in acquiring rare pieces for her private collection. The cover story was perfect. Petrov was known to use art auctions and gallery events to conduct his illegal business, meeting potential clients in plain sight while appearing to be a legitimate businessman. For 3 weeks, Sarah prepared for her role. She studied art history, memorized the details of famous paintings and sculptures, and learned to speak with the refined accent of someone born into wealth. She had documents created showing her as Isabella Romano, heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune, with a documented history of purchasing expensive artwork at international auctions. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the tough, no-nonsense operative who could disarm an enemy in seconds. In her place stood an elegant woman who moved with the graceful confidence of someone who had never known want or danger. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup was subtle but expensive, and her clothing was tailored to perfection. Sarah's first contact with Petrov's world came at an exclusive art auction in Manhattan. The venue was filled with wealthy collectors, museum curators, and art dealers. She moved through the crowd, making small talk about market trends and upcoming exhibitions, all while keeping her eyes open for any sign of Petrov or his associates. During the auction, she noticed a man in his 50s sitting in the back row. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to command, and his eyes constantly swept the room, cataloging faces and potential threats. This was definitely one of Petrov's people. Sarah made sure to catch his attention by bidding aggressively on a rare Byzantine manuscript, eventually winning it for an astronomical sum. After the auction, the man approached her. He introduced himself as Marcus Webb, an art consultant who specialized in helping wealthy clients acquire unique pieces for their collections. His accent was British, but Sarah's trained ear detected something else underneath, possibly Eastern European. Webb was smooth and charming, asking about her collecting interests and complimenting her taste. Sarah played her role perfectly, discussing her passion for medieval art and her desire to find truly exceptional pieces for her estate in Tuscany. She mentioned that money was no object when it came to acquiring something truly special. By the end of their conversation, Webb had invited her to a private viewing the following week. He hinted that some very rare pieces would be available, items that weren't offered through conventional channels. Sarah accepted the invitation, knowing she was one step closer to her target. The private viewing was held in an upscale gallery in Soho. The space was filled with carefully curated pieces, each more valuable than the last. Sarah recognized several works that had been reported stolen from museums and private collections over the past decade. This wasn't just about art, it was about moving valuable assets that could be traded or used as collateral in illegal transactions. As she examined a Renaissance painting that she knew had disappeared from a Florence museum 3 years earlier, Sarah felt someone watching her. She turned to find a man studying her with intense gray eyes. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never met an obstacle he couldn't overcome. This was Viktor Petrov. He approached her slowly, his smile charming but his eyes calculating. When he spoke, his voice was cultured and smooth, with just a hint of his Russian origins. He complimented her eye for quality and asked about her interest in the particular piece she was viewing. Sarah knew this was her moment. Everything she had trained for, all the preparation and planning, came down to this conversation. She needed to intrigue him enough to gain his trust while avoiding any suspicion about her true identity. One wrong word, one inconsistency in her cover story, and the mission would be over before it truly began. As they talked about art and culture, Sarah could sense Petrov testing her, probing for weaknesses or inconsistencies. He was clearly a man who had survived in a dangerous world by being careful and suspicious. But Sarah had faced down terrorists and warlords. She wasn't about to be intimidated by an arms dealer, no matter how sophisticated his operation might be. Petrov's penthouse overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Manhattan. Sarah had been invited to a small dinner party, ostensibly to discuss potential acquisitions for her collection. In reality, she knew this was an opportunity for Petrov to evaluate her more thoroughly, before deciding whether to trust her with his more lucrative ventures. The other guests were an interesting mix of wealthy collectors, gallery owners, and what Sarah recognized as carefully disguised criminal associates. She watched their interactions carefully, noting the subtle power dynamics and unspoken communications that revealed the true nature of Petrov's business network. During cocktails, Sarah found herself in conversation with Elena Kozlov, a stunning Russian woman who claimed to be an art authentication expert. Elena's credentials seemed legitimate, but Sarah detected the same predatory awareness in her eyes that she had seen in seasoned operatives. This woman was far more than she appeared to be. Elena asked probing questions about Sarah's background, her collecting interests, and her financial resources. The interrogation was subtle but thorough, disguised as friendly conversation between two women who shared a passion for art. Sarah answered each question perfectly, maintaining her cover while gathering intelligence about Elena's role in Petrov's organization. As the evening progressed, Sarah learned that Elena served as Petrov's gatekeeper for new clients. She evaluated potential customers, determining their legitimacy and financial capacity before they were allowed access to Petrov's more exclusive offerings. It was clear that passing Elena's scrutiny was essential for the mission's success. The dinner conversation ranged from art market trends to geopolitical developments, with Petrov demonstrating an impressive knowledge of both subjects. He spoke eloquently about the instability in various regions and how it affected the movement of cultural artifacts. Sarah realized he was actually describing his smuggling routes and the political situations that facilitated his arms-dealing operations. After dinner, Petrov invited his guests to view his private collection. The pieces were extraordinary, paintings by masters that museums would kill to own, sculptures from ancient civilizations, and artifacts that belonged in the world's greatest cultural institutions. Many of these items had been reported stolen, or had simply disappeared from their rightful owners during times of conflict. Sarah maintained her composure while internally cataloging everything she saw. Each piece represented evidence of Petrov's criminal activities, and their recovery would be a significant victory for law enforcement agencies worldwide. But she needed to stay focused on her primary objective, stopping the arms deal that could put advanced weapons into terrorist hands. As the other guests began to leave, Petrov asked Sarah to stay behind for a private conversation. They moved to his study, a book-lined room that felt more like a military command center than a collector's office. Maps covered one wall, marked with locations that Sarah recognized as conflict zones and smuggling routes. Petrov poured expensive whiskey and studied Sarah with calculating eyes. He began asking more direct questions about her resources and her willingness to acquire items through unconventional channels. Sarah responded with enthusiasm, expressing frustration with the limitations of legitimate auction houses and her desire to own truly unique pieces regardless of their provenance. The conversation gradually shifted to more dangerous territory. Petrov mentioned that some of his most valuable acquisitions came from clients who needed to liquidate assets quickly due to changing circumstances. He described scenarios that Sarah recognized as describing arms dealers and terrorist financiers who needed to convert weapons into portable wealth. Sarah played her role perfectly, showing interest in these opportunities while maintaining the naive enthusiasm of a wealthy collector who didn't fully understand the implications of what she was discussing. She expressed willingness to pay premium prices for exceptional pieces and showed no concern about their origins or legal status. By the end of the evening, Petrov seemed satisfied with her credentials. He mentioned that he would be traveling to Dubai the following week for some business meetings and suggested that Sarah might be interested in joining him. He hinted that some very special items would be available for viewing, pieces that required discretion and substantial financial commitment. Sarah accepted the invitation immediately, knowing this was her chance to get closer to Petrov's arms-dealing operation. The Dubai trip would likely involve meetings with his terrorist clients and possibly the arms deal her agency was trying to prevent. Over the next few days, Sarah prepared for the Dubai operation. Her handlers arranged for additional financial backing to support her cover story and provided her with sophisticated surveillance equipment disguised as luxury accessories. They also established secure communication protocols that would allow her to relay intelligence without compromising her position. The flight to Dubai was aboard Petrov's private jet, a luxurious aircraft that served as his mobile command center. Sarah noticed the enhanced security features and the presence of armed guards disguised as crew members. Petrov clearly took no chances with his safety, understanding that his business made him a target for both law enforcement and rival criminal organizations. During the flight, Sarah continued building her relationship with both Petrov and Elena. She shared stories about her collecting adventures, describing fictional purchases that demonstrated her willingness to bend rules and her access to substantial financial resources. Both Russians seemed increasingly comfortable with her presence, viewing her as a valuable potential client rather than a threat. Elena revealed more about her own background during their conversations. She claimed to have grown up in St. Petersburg, studying art history before moving into the commercial side of the business, but Sarah detected inconsistencies in her story that suggested a military or intelligence background. This woman was definitely more than she appeared to be. As they approached Dubai, Petrov outlined their schedule for the next few days. They would be attending several private viewings and meeting with potential buyers for various items. He emphasized the need for discretion, explaining that some of his clients valued their privacy above all else. Sarah understood that she was about to enter the heart of Petrov's criminal empire. The next few days would determine whether she could gather enough intelligence to stop the arms deal and bring down his organization. She would need to maintain her cover while navigating increasingly dangerous situations. The aircraft began its descent toward Dubai International Airport as Sarah reviewed her mission parameters one final time. She had successfully infiltrated Petrov's inner circle, but the real challenge was just beginning. In a world where one mistake could mean death, she would need to use every skill she had learned as a Navy SEAL to complete her mission and return home safely. As the city's glittering skyline came into view, Sarah felt the familiar calm that always settled over her before a dangerous operation. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Dubai's opulent skyline glittered in the desert heat as Sarah's limousine wound through the city's ultra-modern streets. Petrov had installed her in a suite at the Burj Al Arab, the world's most luxurious hotel, where privacy and discretion were guaranteed for the right price. The accommodations were part of maintaining her cover as a wealthy collector, but they also provided the perfect base of operations for her surveillance activities. Her first meeting was scheduled for that evening at a private gallery in the Gold Souk district. Petrov had arranged for several potential sellers to showcase their most exclusive pieces, items that couldn't be displayed through conventional channels. Sarah understood that this was code for stolen artifacts, looted antiquities, and other cultural treasures that had been illegally removed from their countries of origin. As she prepared for the evening, Sarah activated the surveillance equipment concealed in her jewelry and handbag. The devices were virtually undetectable, designed to look like normal luxury accessories while transmitting audio and video feeds to her handlers. She also reviewed the intelligence briefings about Petrov's known associates in the region, memorizing faces and backgrounds of potential contacts. The gallery was located in a converted warehouse, its industrial exterior giving no hint of the treasures contained within. Sarah arrived to find an exclusive gathering of perhaps 20 people, all dressed in expensive clothing and speaking in hushed tones. The atmosphere was electric with the kind of excitement that comes from dealing in forbidden merchandise. Petrov introduced her to several key figures in his network. There was Ahmed al-Rashid, a Saudi prince who collected ancient Arabian artifacts despite international sanctions against such acquisitions. Maria Santos represented wealthy South American clients interested in pre-Columbian art. Dr. Heinrich Weber claimed to be a legitimate antiquities dealer, but Sarah recognized him from intelligence files as a major player in the international art theft community. The items on display were breathtaking in their beauty and historical significance. Sarah saw Egyptian artifacts that belonged in the Cairo Museum, Greek sculptures that had been carved 25 centuries ago, and medieval manuscripts illuminated by monks in European monasteries. Each piece represented not just monetary value, but irreplaceable cultural heritage that had been stolen from its rightful place. As the evening progressed, Sarah began to understand the true scope of Petrov's operation. He wasn't just selling individual pieces to wealthy collectors. He was operating a sophisticated network that moved cultural artifacts around the world, using them as currency in transactions involving weapons, drugs, and other illegal commodities. A stolen painting might be traded for advanced military hardware, which could then be sold to terrorist organizations for enormous profits. Elena Kozlov circulated through the gathering, facilitating introductions and managing the complex negotiations that were taking place. Sarah noticed that Elena carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Her movements were too controlled, too aware of her surroundings, for someone whose background was purely academic. During a quiet moment, Sarah overheard a conversation between Petrov and a man she didn't recognize. They were discussing a shipment that would arrive the following day, something that required special handling and maximum security. The man mentioned that their friends from the mountains were very interested in the contents and were prepared to pay the agreed-upon price. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what she was hearing. The Friends from the Mountains was likely a reference to a terrorist group operating in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region. Intelligence reports had suggested that this particular organization was trying to acquire advanced surface-to-air missiles that could threaten commercial aircraft throughout the region. She moved closer, pretending to examine a nearby sculpture, while straining to hear more details. The conversation was conducted in low voices and multiple languages, with key details discussed in Russian. Sarah's language training allowed her to understand most of what was being said, and what she heard confirmed her worst fears. The shipment contained Russian-made Igla missiles, among the most advanced portable anti-aircraft weapons in the world. These weapons were capable of shooting down passenger jets, military helicopters, and transport aircraft. In the hands of terrorists, they would represent a catastrophic threat to aviation security worldwide. The deal was scheduled to be completed the following evening at a location outside the city. Petrov would personally oversee the transaction, ensuring that the weapons were properly transferred and that payment was received. The total value of the deal was estimated at $50 million, money that would finance terrorist operations for years to come. Sarah knew she needed to alert her handlers immediately, but she couldn't risk compromising her cover by leaving the gathering early or behaving suspiciously. She continued moving through the crowd, making appropriate comments about the various artworks while her mind raced through the implications of what she had learned. As the evening wound down, Petrov approached her with a special invitation. He wanted to show her something truly exceptional, a piece that wasn't part of the general display. Sarah followed him to a private room where a single artwork was illuminated, under dramatic lighting. It was a painting by Leonardo da Vinci that had been stolen from a private collector in Italy 3 years earlier. The work was priceless, both artistically and historically, representing one of the master's previously unknown creations. Sarah struggled to maintain her composure while looking at the stolen masterpiece. Petrov watched her reaction carefully, gauging her response to seeing something so valuable and so clearly stolen. Sarah expressed appropriate awe and excitement, asking about the painting's provenance and availability. Petrov smiled, pleased with her reaction, and began describing how such pieces could be acquired by clients who appreciated their true worth. The conversation gradually shifted to more dangerous territory as Petrov tested her willingness to engage in increasingly illegal transactions. He described scenarios involving the movement of valuable items across international borders, the use of diplomatic pouches to avoid customs inspection, and the conversion of physical assets into untraceable digital currencies. Sarah responded with enthusiasm, demonstrating knowledge of financial instruments and international banking that suggested she had experience with complex transactions. She hinted at her own involvement in moving money through offshore accounts and expressed interest in expanding her collection through whatever means necessary. By the end of their private conversation, Petrov seemed convinced of her legitimacy and her value as a potential client. He invited her to join him the following evening for what he described as a very special transaction. He emphasized the need for absolute discretion and warned that the people they would be meeting were extremely serious about security. Sarah accepted the invitation, knowing that this was her opportunity to witness the arms deal and gather the evidence needed to stop it. She also realized that she was walking into extreme danger. The location would be heavily guarded, the participants would be armed and paranoid, and any mistake on her part could result in her death and the failure of the mission. As she returned to her hotel suite that night, Sarah used her secure communication equipment to brief her handlers on what she had learned. The response was immediate and alarming. Intelligence agencies around the world had been tracking the missing Igla missiles for months, and their transfer to terrorist organizations would represent a major escalation in the global security threat. Her handlers authorized her to proceed with the operation while arranging for backup support to be positioned in the area. However, they emphasized that she would be on her own during the actual transaction. Any overt intervention could result in the deal being called off and the weapons disappearing into the international black market. Sarah spent the rest of the night preparing for what could be the most dangerous mission of her career. She checked her equipment, reviewed her escape routes, and mentally rehearsed every possible scenario. Tomorrow night she would come face to face with some of the world's most dangerous criminals, and the success of her mission could determine whether innocent people lived or died. The desert compound lay 30 kilometers outside Dubai, hidden among rolling sand dunes and accessible only through a single dirt road that wound between rocky outcroppings. Sarah sat in the passenger seat of Petrov's armored SUV, watching the landscape change from urban luxury to harsh wilderness. 2 additional vehicles followed them, carrying armed security personnel who had been thoroughly briefed on the evening's activities. Petrov had been unusually quiet during the drive, his attention focused on encrypted communications with various members of his organization. Sarah could sense the tension that always preceded major criminal transactions. Everyone involved understood that deals of this magnitude attracted attention from law enforcement agencies around the world, and one mistake could result in arrest, imprisonment, or worse. Elena Kozlov rode in the second vehicle, coordinating security arrangements and maintaining contact with the buyers who were approaching from a different direction. Through her surveillance equipment, Sarah could hear fragments of conversations in multiple languages as various parties confirmed their readiness to proceed with the transaction. As they approached the compound, Sarah observed the sophisticated security measures that had been put in place. Motion sensors lined the access road, thermal cameras monitored the surrounding desert, and armed guards were positioned at strategic points around the perimeter. This wasn't just a business meeting. It was a military operation designed to protect assets worth tens of millions of dollars. The compound itself was a collection of converted shipping containers arranged around a central courtyard. The containers had been modified to serve as offices, storage areas, and living quarters for the security team. Powerful floodlights illuminated the entire facility, creating a bright island of activity in the dark desert. Inside the main container, Sarah found herself in a surprisingly sophisticated command center. Banks of monitors displayed feeds from security cameras positioned throughout the area, while communication equipment maintained contact with lookouts positioned several kilometers away. Petrov clearly took no chances when conducting business of this magnitude. The buyers arrived an hour after sunset, their convoy approaching from the south in a cloud of desert dust. Sarah watched through the security monitors as 3 black SUVs pulled into the compound. The vehicles were armor-plated and carried diplomatic plates from a country she recognized as a known sponsor of international terrorism. The men who emerged from the vehicles looked like what they were: professional soldiers turned mercenaries. They moved with military precision, constantly scanning for threats while maintaining defensive formations around their leader. Sarah counted at least 12 armed men, all carrying automatic weapons and wearing body armor beneath their traditional robes. The leader of the group was a man in his 40s who introduced himself simply as Commander Hassan. Sarah recognized him from intelligence briefings as Mahmoud al-Zahra, a former Syrian army officer who had defected during the civil war and now led one of the region's most dangerous terrorist organizations. His presence confirmed the gravity of the situation and the potential consequences if the weapons deal was completed successfully. Hassan inspected the missiles with the expert eye of someone who had extensive experience with military hardware. The weapons were stored in specially designed containers that maintained proper temperature and humidity levels while protecting them from sand and other environmental hazards. Each missile came with its own targeting system and could be operated by a single person with minimal training. The negotiation process was conducted with the formality of a legitimate business transaction. Hassan's financial representative transferred the agreed-upon payment through a series of cryptocurrency exchanges that would make the money virtually untraceable. Petrov's team verified the transactions using sophisticated computer equipment that could track payments through multiple blockchain networks. Sarah watched the proceedings while maintaining her cover as an interested observer, learning about how such transactions were conducted. She made appropriate comments about the impressive organization and security measures, while secretly recording everything through her surveillance equipment. The evidence she was gathering would be crucial for prosecuting everyone involved in the operation. As the weapons were being loaded onto Hassan's vehicles, Petrov drew Sarah aside for a private conversation. He explained that transactions like this required absolute trust between all parties, and that trust was built through mutual vulnerability. Everyone present was committing serious crimes, which meant they all had strong incentives to maintain secrecy about what had transpired. Sarah nodded her understanding while internally noting the implicit threat in Petrov's words. She was now a witness to a major arms deal involving international terrorists, which made her both an asset and a potential liability to his organization. Her survival depended on maintaining her cover while gathering enough evidence to bring down the entire network. The conversation was interrupted by urgent communications from the perimeter security team. Long-range surveillance had detected movement in the desert approximately 10 kilometers away. Multiple vehicles were approaching from the northwest, moving in a pattern that suggested military or law enforcement operations rather than random desert travelers. Petrov immediately shifted into crisis management mode, coordinating with his security team while assessing potential threats and escape routes. Hassan's people took defensive positions around the compound while preparing to evacuate with their newly acquired weapons. The carefully controlled atmosphere of a business transaction suddenly transformed into a tense military situation. Sarah realized that her backup support had been detected, which meant the situation was about to become extremely dangerous. If shooting started, she would be caught in the crossfire between heavily armed criminals and law enforcement personnel. Her only chance of survival was to maintain her cover while looking for an opportunity to escape or assist her colleagues. The approaching vehicles turned out to be a joint task force comprising American Special Forces, Dubai Police, and Interpol agents. Intelligence agencies had been tracking the weapons shipment for months, and Sarah's reports had provided them with the location and timing needed to intercept the transaction. However, the premature detection of their approach meant that the element of surprise had been lost. Petrov's security chief recommended immediate evacuation, but Hassan's people were reluctant to abandon their newly purchased weapons. The terrorist leader demanded that Petrov's organization honor their agreement by ensuring safe passage for the missiles, regardless of the law enforcement presence in the area. The disagreement quickly escalated into a heated argument, as both sides accused each other of inadequate security measures. Sarah watched the dynamics carefully, understanding that the breakdown in cooperation between the two groups could provide an opportunity for law enforcement to prevent the weapons from reaching their intended destination. Elena Kozlov emerged as the voice of reason, proposing a compromise that would allow Hassan's people to escape with half of the weapons, while the remainder were destroyed to eliminate evidence of the transaction. This solution would limit the damage while preserving the working relationship between the two organizations for future deals. Sarah knew she had to act before the compromise was implemented. Half of the missiles in terrorist hands would still represent a catastrophic security threat, capable of shooting down civilian aircraft throughout the region. She needed to find a way to signal her true identity to the approaching law enforcement team while avoiding immediate execution by Petrov's security personnel. As the various parties prepared for potential combat, Sarah positioned herself near the communications equipment in the command center. If she could access the radio frequencies being used by the task force, she might be able to provide them with crucial intelligence about the compound's defenses and the locations of key personnel. The situation was about to explode into violence, and Sarah found herself at the center of one of the most dangerous operations of her career. Everything she had trained for as a Navy SEAL would be tested in the next few minutes as she attempted to complete her mission while staying alive in a desert compound surrounded by armed criminals and approaching law enforcement personnel. The sound of helicopters approaching from the east confirmed that the final confrontation was about to begin. The first explosion shattered the night silence as a rocket-propelled grenade struck one of the perimeter guard towers. Sarah threw herself behind a concrete barrier as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions, the carefully planned arms transaction dissolving into a chaotic firefight between law enforcement and heavily armed criminals. Through the smoke and muzzle flashes, Sarah could see Petrov's security team taking defensive positions around the compound, while Hassan's terrorists attempted to load the remaining missiles onto their vehicles. The approaching task force had surrounded the facility, but the criminals' superior knowledge of the terrain and defensive preparations gave them a temporary advantage. Sarah knew she had minutes, maybe less, before her cover would be blown by the intensity of the combat situation. Petrov and Elena were shouting orders to their people while coordinating their defense through encrypted radio communications. In the confusion, Sarah saw her opportunity to act. She rolled across the open ground to the communications equipment, using her Navy SEAL training to move silently despite the chaos around her. The radio system was sophisticated, but not unlike equipment she had used during military operations. Her fingers flew over the controls as she searched for the frequencies being used by the task force commander. Burst of gunfire from Hassan's position forced her to duck as bullets shattered the equipment mounted above her head. When she raised her head again, she could see Elena Kozlov watching her with suspicious eyes. The Russian woman's expression had changed from professional concern to deadly calculation, and Sarah realized that her cover might already be compromised. Elena began moving toward her position, one hand reaching inside her jacket where Sarah knew she carried a concealed pistol. Years of operating in dangerous situations had given Elena the instincts to recognize when something wasn't quite right, and Sarah's behavior during the attack had apparently triggered those instincts. Sarah completed the radio frequency adjustment just as Elena reached her position. Speaking rapidly into the microphone, she transmitted the locations of the missile containers and identified the key personnel involved in the transaction. The information would be crucial for the task force to prioritize their objectives during the assault. Elena's pistol was halfway out of its holster when Sarah struck, using her forearm to deflect the weapon while driving her knee into the other woman's solar plexus. Elena gasped and staggered backward, but she was clearly trained in close combat and recovered quickly. Swinging the pistol toward Sarah's head, Sarah caught Elena's wrist and twisted, using leverage to force the Russian woman to drop her weapon. Elena responded with a vicious elbow strike that barely missed Sarah's temple, followed by a knee aimed at her ribs. The two women grappled in the confined space between shipping containers, while explosions and gunfire continued around them. Elena was skilled and dangerous, But Sarah's SEAL training gave her advantages in both technique and conditioning. She managed to get behind Elena and apply a chokehold, cutting off blood flow to the brain until the Russian operative went limp in her arms. Sarah lowered Elena to the ground and secured her pistol before turning her attention back to the larger battle. Petrov had noticed Elena's absence and was scanning the area with growing suspicion. When he spotted Sarah near the communications equipment, his expression changed to one of deadly understanding. He raised his weapon and began moving toward her position, shouting orders to his security team about eliminating a potential spy. Sarah drew Elena's pistol and took cover behind a shipping container as bullets began striking the metal surface around her. Petrov's security team was well-trained and disciplined, maintaining their defensive positions while directing concentrated fire at her location. She was pinned down with limited ammunition and no clear escape route. The situation changed dramatically when the task force assault helicopters arrived overhead, their searchlights illuminating the compound, while Dr. Gunners provided covering fire for the ground teams. The helicopter's presence shifted the tactical balance, forcing Petrov's people to divide their attention between multiple threats. Sarah used the distraction to move between containers, working her way toward the vehicles where Hassan's people were loading the missiles. If she could disable or damage the weapons, she could prevent them from leaving the compound even if some of the terrorists managed to escape. Hassan himself was personally supervising the loading operation, clearly understanding that his organization's future capabilities depended on successfully acquiring these weapons. His bodyguards maintained a protective perimeter, while combat engineers worked to secure the missile containers in their vehicles. Sarah reached the edge of the vehicle park just as Hassan's convoy prepared to depart. She had one chance to prevent the missiles from escaping, but it would require her to abandon cover and expose herself to fire from multiple directions. The decision came down to weighing her personal safety against the potential consequences of advanced anti-aircraft missiles reaching terrorist organizations. She made her choice with the certainty that had carried her through 8 years of dangerous SEAL operations. Breaking from cover, she sprinted toward the lead vehicle, while firing Elena's pistol at the guards around it. Her sudden appearance caught Hassan's people off guard, and she managed to reach the vehicle before they could coordinate an effective response. Sarah pulled the pins from 2 grenades she had taken from Elena's equipment and threw them into the truck bed where several missile containers were secured. The explosions would destroy the weapons and prevent their use against innocent civilians, but the blast would also eliminate her only available cover. The grenades detonated with devastating effect, destroying not only the missiles but also the entire front section of Hassan's convoy. The terrorist leader himself was thrown clear of the explosion, but several of his bodyguards were killed instantly. The remaining terrorists began firing frantically in all directions, no longer sure who represented the greatest threat to their survival. Sarah found herself caught in the open ground between the destroyed vehicles and the shipping containers where Petrov's people maintained their defensive positions. Bullets were striking the sand around her feet as she ran in a zigzag pattern toward the nearest cover, using every evasive technique she had learned during her military training. A sniper's bullet caught her in the left shoulder, spinning her around and sending her tumbling behind a concrete barrier. The wound was painful but not life-threatening, and she still had full use of her arm. However, her position was becoming increasingly untenable as enemy forces closed in from multiple directions. The situation was saved by the arrival of the ground assault team, heavily armed law enforcement officers who had breached the compound's perimeter defenses. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of American voices coordinating their advance, and she knew that her colleagues had finally reached her position. Petrov made one final attempt to escape, running toward a helicopter that had been hidden behind the compound's main building. Sarah realized that if he reached the aircraft, he would disappear into the international criminal underground and continue his illegal operations from a new location. Despite her wounded shoulder, Sarah pursued Petrov across the open ground between the containers. The arms dealer was faster than she had expected, but her conditioning and determination allowed her to gradually close the distance. She could see the helicopter's rotors beginning to spin as the pilot prepared for immediate takeoff. Petrov reached the aircraft and was climbing aboard when Sarah tackled him from behind, sending both of them tumbling to the ground beside the helicopter's landing skid. The Russian arms dealer was stronger than his refined appearance suggested, and he fought with the desperation of a man who knew that capture meant life in prison. They struggled in the sand beside the aircraft while the pilot debated whether to attempt takeoff with his passenger. Still fighting on the ground, Sarah managed to get on top of Petrov and was reaching for her handcuffs when the arms dealer pulled a concealed knife and slashed at her injured shoulder. The pain was excruciating, but Sarah's training had prepared her for fighting through injury and exhaustion. She caught Petrov's wrist and twisted until he dropped the knife, then applied pressure to nerve points that left him temporarily paralyzed. By the time the task force members reached their position, she had Petrov securely restrained and the helicopter pilot in custody. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a secure courtroom in Virginia, watching as Viktor Petrov received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The arms dealer who had once commanded a global criminal empire now wore orange prison clothing and shackles, his expensive suits and luxurious lifestyle replaced by the harsh reality of maximum security incarceration. The trial had been a showcase of international cooperation, with evidence provided by law enforcement agencies from 12 different countries. Sarah's undercover work had provided the crucial intelligence needed to build an airtight case against Petrov and his organization. The recordings she had made during her infiltration documented dozens of illegal transactions involving stolen art, weapons trafficking, and terrorism financing. Elena Kozlov had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for testimony against her former associates. Her information led to arrests across 3 continents, dismantling networks that had operated for decades. The Russian operative was facing 25 years in federal prison, but her cooperation had prevented countless future crimes and saved unknown numbers of innocent lives. Mahmoud al-Zahra, the terrorist leader known as Commander Hassan, had been less fortunate. He died during the firefight at the desert compound, eliminating one of the region's most dangerous extremists. His organization fragmented without his leadership, significantly reducing their operational capabilities and threat to international security. Sarah's shoulder had healed completely, though physical therapy had required several months of intensive work. The bullet had missed major nerves and blood vessels, but the injury served as a permanent reminder of how close she had come to death during the operation. Her doctors had assured her that she would regain full function, and her recent fitness evaluations confirmed their optimism. The stolen artworks recovered from Petrov's various facilities were being returned to their rightful owners around the world. Museums that had mourned the loss of priceless cultural artifacts were finally getting their treasures back. The Leonardo da Vinci painting that Sarah had seen in Dubai was now safely restored to its place in a private collection in Florence, its owner having given up hope of ever seeing it again. The Igla missiles that had been the focus of the entire operation were destroyed under international supervision, their advanced targeting systems rendered permanently inoperable. Intelligence analysts estimated that the weapons could have been used to shoot down passenger aircraft carrying thousands of innocent people. The successful interdiction of the arms deal had prevented a potential catastrophe of enormous proportions. Sarah's role in the operation remained classified, known only to a small group of intelligence officials and military commanders. Publicly, she was simply another government employee who had received a routine commendation for outstanding service. The real story of her infiltration and the dangers she had faced would remain secret for decades, if it was ever revealed at all. Her commanding officer had offered her a promotion and assignment to a prestigious position at the Pentagon, but Sarah had declined the offer. She preferred field operations where she could make a direct difference in protecting innocent people from the world's most dangerous criminals. Desk jobs and briefing rooms held no appeal for someone who had spent her career in the shadows where real battles were fought. The success of the Petrov operation had enhanced Sarah's reputation within the intelligence community, leading to requests for her services from agencies around the world. She had been consulted on operations involving arms trafficking in South America, art theft in Europe, and terrorism financing in Southeast Asia. Her expertise in deep cover infiltration made her invaluable for missions requiring long-term deception and extreme personal risk. One unexpected consequence of the mission had been a renewed interest in art and culture. Sarah had spent months studying the history and significance of various artistic movements, and she found herself genuinely fascinated by the creativity and passion that produced such beautiful works. She began visiting museums during her time off, appreciating masterpieces not as potential evidence but as expressions of human achievement. She also developed a deeper understanding of how cultural heritage could be used as a weapon by criminal organizations. The theft and trafficking of artistic treasures wasn't just about money. It was about destroying the connections between people and their history, erasing the evidence of human creativity and achievement. Stopping these crimes was about more than law enforcement. It was about preserving civilization itself. The psychological toll of the operation had been significant, requiring months of counseling to process the stress of maintaining false identities while surrounded by dangerous criminals. Sarah had been forced to witness terrible crimes while pretending to approve of them, creating internal conflicts that took time to resolve. The military's mental health support systems had helped her work through these challenges while maintaining her operational effectiveness. Her relationship with her family had also evolved during this period. Sarah's parents had always worried about her chosen career, knowing that her work involved danger but never understanding the specific risks she faced. While she still couldn't discuss the details of her operations, she was able to share more about the importance of her mission and the satisfaction she derived from protecting innocent people. Looking back on the Petrov operation, Sarah felt pride in what she had accomplished but also soberness about the ongoing challenges facing international security. Stopping one arms dealer hadn't eliminated the problem of weapons trafficking, just as recovering one collection hadn't ended the theft of cultural artifacts. The criminal networks that threatened global stability were vast and persistent, requiring constant vigilance from law enforcement agencies around the world. New threats were emerging constantly as technology advanced and criminal organizations adapted to changing circumstances. Cyber warfare, bioterrorism, and nuclear proliferation represented challenges that would require new approaches and new forms of cooperation between nations. Sarah's skills and experience would continue to be needed as long as there were people willing to profit from violence and chaos. As she left the courthouse after Petrov's sentencing, Sarah reflected on the choice she had made years earlier to dedicate her life to protecting others. The decision had cost her normal relationships, financial security, and the simple pleasure of living without constant awareness of potential threats. But it had also given her the opportunity to make a real difference in the world, to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them. Walking through the Virginia sunshine toward her next assignment, Sarah Martinez carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the worst humanity had to offer and emerged victorious. She was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that her training, experience, and determination would see her through whatever dangers awaited in the shadows where she conducted her war against the forces of chaos and evil. The world was safer because of what she had done, and that was enough.